the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about a new feature that we've implemented in version 4.16.3. This feature is kind of an extension of an existing feature, and to show it, I want to go to a return screen for a manifest that I previously scanned out. Let's go over to inventory settings really quick, and I want to show you what the previous feature was and what it did. In inventory settings, we have this setting called allocation-based scan validation. And admittedly, this wasn't working 100% how it was intended previously. What was supposed to happen is that if you have this set to yes, then it would prompt you to say anytime that you tried to scan in more of a non-serialized item than you had allocated, then the prompt would pop up and say that you're trying to scan in more than you actually own. And then if this were marked to yes, I believe it would make it so that it doesn't allow you to scan those items in. But if it was marked as no, then you would be able to scan those items in and go above the allocated quantity. Now, we were finding a few problems with this. Some people were saying that it didn't matter whether it was set to yes or no, and that, I believe, was just a bug that we had in the system. So instead of just fixing that, we kind of looked at the whole issue as a whole and looked at some other things that people were reporting and decided to slightly alter the way that this allocation-based scan validation works. One of the main reasons that we changed this is we had a few customer issues where they were saying that if they are transferring gear from one warehouse to another, and if the warehouse that they were sending the gear to didn't have any, or if it had a very low allocated quantity, and let's say, for example, I think I had one item set up here. I must have changed those quantities, but let's say that this item here, this XLR 100 foot, let's say that we owned about 200 of these in our Salt Lake City location. In our Denver location is just kind of a satellite office that doesn't really have much inventory, but we wanted to transfer 100 of them to Denver. And so some of our customers were saying that when they tried to do this, if they wanted to transfer all 100, they would get that allocation quantity prompt that would say, well, you can't scan 100 into your Denver location right now because you only have an allocated quantity of 5. Now, they could get around that by going in and scanning 5 at a time, but if you have 100 or 200 items, then that's going to be 20 or 30 or 40 scans, and so that was getting a little bit annoying. And so what we did was just slightly change the way that this allocation scan quantity works, and I'll show you how that works now. First of all, I want to mention that now this is independent of this setting. We're leaving this setting here because there's still a few places that we might decide to keep this setting, like for example in the free scan in. There's still a little bit of work that we have to do there, but for the time being, this does work as intended on things like a return manifest. And so let me show you exactly how that works. And of course, this should work similarly to a transfer manifest as well. So if we look at the items that are on this manifest, it's just my XLR cable from 10 to 100 feet. And you can see that most of them have an allocated quantity in my Salt Lake warehouse of 10. Remember, the first number is the current on hand, what is currently sitting in your warehouse, and the second number is allocated, just meaning how many do you own in total. And so this first number is always going to be kind of fluid. Whenever you scan things in and out, this number will go up and down. And the second number should be pretty static. Unless you purchase some more and you receive those items, then this allocated quantity would go up because you now own more, or you could manually change that quantity. Let's say that I purchased 5 more, and I just want to say that my allocated is now 5. I could do something like that. For this example, I'm just going to leave it as it was. And so when I go to the return manifest now, and let's see, that was my 10 foot. And I return the 10 that were out on the job. Then, of course, that first number will go up now because I returned 10. but that second number remains at 10 because that's just designating how many I own in total. Now let's look at how this new prompt works if we try to scan in more than is actually allocated for the location that I'm scanning to. So right now I'm scanning to my Salt Lake City warehouse, and let's say that I am scanning in my 25-foot cables, which I have an allocated quantity of 10, and you'll notice from the return manifest that's how many I scanned out as well. But let's say that I just so happen to, for whatever reason, inherit a few more of these cables on the way back. So maybe it was at a job at a hotel or something, and the hotel said, why don't you just go ahead and keep a couple of those cables. I don't know if a hotel would actually say that, but that's the best scenario I could think of right now. But let's just say that you happen to have more return, or actually a better scenario would be, let's say that you had 25-foot XLR cable come from multiple of your locations, and they happen to all get returned to the same location. And so what happens here is, let's say I'm returning these 25, but I have more than the 10 that I scanned out. So it's telling me what my allocated quantity is. And what this means is not the allocated quantity that was scanned out to the manifest, but it's referring to the allocated quantity of that warehouse altogether. So when I'm scanning in that 25-footer, it's saying, well, for Salt Lake City, you're only supposed to have 10. And so if I scan in 15 because I got 5 extra, now what Flex is going to do is give me this prompt that says the quantity that you're scanning, or the quantity scanned, is greater than the quantity owned. And again, it's referring to the location that I'm scanning into. Do you want to continue, yes or no? And so again, in the past, with that setting that we had in inventory settings, if I tried to scan more than I actually owned, this would typically turn red and just not let me scan at all. So I would have to scan in 10 first, but then I can come back and scan another 5. But now what we're allowing you to do is make that decision just with one entry. So even if I entered 100 right here, and I only have an allocated quantity of 10, it would still pop up this prompt and ask, are you sure you want to scan in that many, because it exceeds the allocated quantity that you have for that warehouse. If I say no, it just resets. Maybe I accidentally typed in something too high. Sometimes you have fat fingers and maybe you accidentally typed 0 twice. And that's a good way to have you say, oh, wait, this exceeds my allocated value. Oh, I accidentally typed in 1 extra 0. But if you actually do intend to scan in more than what is allocated for that location, then you'll just click yes. And now if we look at the quantity tab of our 25 footers, we now have more than is actually allocated. And of course, this brings into question a few other issues, like now, is this just a temporary 15 that you have here, or do you plan on always having 15 at this warehouse? And if you do happen to have that second scenario is what we're going with here, then I would want to change my allocated quantity, because now I own 15 in my Salt Lake location all the time. And so that's really just what I wanted to explain, is what this prompt means. So again, if I'm returning inventory, in this case, let's just return what actually went out and what is allocated for that warehouse. But if we look at our 100-foot cable, I only have allocated 10 for this warehouse. And so if I try to return more than that, this is what's going to throw the prompt and ask, are you sure you want to scan in that many, because it exceeds the amount that is allocated for that warehouse? Now again, one of the main reasons that we did this is because we wanted to show, and I don't think I have an example set up, but we wanted it to be able to be a little bit more convenient for you when you're receiving a transfer manifest. And I think I might have let's just look really quick. If we go to receive a transfer manifest, I might have one out that hasn't been received yet. Let's try this one. So it looks like I have some XLR cable 100 that's going from Utah to Denver. So let's change my receiving location to Denver. And then let's look at what my allocated quantity for Denver is. Right now it's only 5. And so if I'm receiving these 10, again, in the past, I would have had to say, well, I'm receiving 5, click accept, and then do it again and say that I'm receiving 5. But now I can actually say, well, I'm receiving all 10 that is on these transfer manifests, and it's just going to give me the prompt now that says, well, are you sure that you want to receive a quantity that's greater than the allocated quantity for that location? So it just makes it a little bit easier now for you to be able to receive those items that are being transferred from one warehouse to another if you have an allocated quantity that's much lower. Like I said, we're still working a little bit on how this works with a free scan in. We just barely released this feature, so we're, of course, looking for feedback if you have any. But with a free scan in, it works a little bit differently because if you're scanning in a non-serialized item that's out on multiple jobs, then it will bring up that prompt that shows which jobs it's out on, and you can enter a quantity that you're returning for each job. And by default, you can't enter a quantity that's higher than what was on the manifest. And so there might be a little bit of room to make some changes there, but we are welcoming some feedback there. One of the main things that we have been hearing from some customers after this update is that they've never seen this prompt before and they're not sure why they're seeing it. And for the most part, we're finding that customers that are mentioning this, I'm noticing that a lot of their inventory, their non-serialized inventory, is not set up in the intended way. Now again, Flex is, of course, very flexible and customizable, and people use the system in different ways. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of people have their non-serialized items set up something like this, where they have an on-hand quantity, but a 0 allocated quantity. Now again, this number will go up and down as you scan things in and out, but the allocated quantity is static, which is telling you how many do you actually own. And so that's what I'm finding is that a few of our customers who are writing in about this prompt and wondering why they're seeing it, it's because they have 0 allocated quantities on a lot of their non-serialized items. And so when they're on a return manifest and returning those items, then of course that prompt is going to come up on every non-serialized item that has an allocated quantity of 0. So I just want to stress that that prompt doesn't come up based on what the return quantity is supposed to be. That prompt will only show up based on what the allocated quantity for the warehouse that you're scanning into is supposed to be. So if you're seeing that prompt and you're not really loving that prompt and you don't want it to pop up every time, then you might want to go into those non-serialized items and adjust the second number or the allocated quantity to match the full quantity that you actually own. So if you have any suggestions for this, if you're finding that it's not working in a very, fluid way or a way that you would expect it to work, we're more than happy to review some suggestions or recommendations. If you could just send those into support so that we can track each of those, that's support@flexrentalsolutions.com. And if you have any other questions about this or anything else about Flex, then please email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.